Hi, everyone. Welcome. So excited to have you all. Come on in. We'd love for you to keep your cameras on so we can see everyone. I will ask you to mute. And I'll wait, make maybe a minute and a half, let everybody in, and then we'll go ahead and get started with Molree's presentation tonight. Go ahead and mute when you're ready. All right. I'm going to start my introduction. Everybody, thank you so much for being here. We're so grateful for your time and effort, energy tonight. We are incredibly lucky to be joined by Molree Williams-Lendor tonight. She is the Senior Director of Workplace Culture and Inclusion and Title IX Coordinator at NYU Langone Health. Molree, thank you so much for being here. We are so grateful to have you. The floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah. And I am very happy to be here as well. So let me share my screen and then we will get started. Okay, I think we are in good shape. So good evening. Well, I'm in New York, so good evening from my location. This is our opportunity to talk about understanding and addressing microaggressions. This is one of my favorite topics. Throughout my career, I would encounter situations that I didn't know what to call it. And one day I found out about microaggressions and I realized that answered a lot of my questions, which then helped me understand how to address it. And I hope for those listening today, you can have that same experience if you're not familiar with it. By background, I describe myself as a social worker who went to law school and worked as a social worker in community mental health centers, worked as a lawyer in law firm doing medical malpractice and employment discrimination. But I find that I found my ability to use my degrees, my background, my experience when I began doing this diversity, equity, inclusion work, because it really brings together the things that are really important to me and I think should be really important to all of us. So I'll mention different aspects of that as we go through. I'm hopeful that everybody knows where their chat is because I would love for you to use your chat. I want this to be as interactive as possible, even though we're on Zoom. So I'm going to pose questions, drop your comments. At some point when I get a chance, I'll glance at them. If there's something you want to share, I invite you to come off, mute and do that because it's really important that we get to hear from everyone and we really make it as interactive as possible. So this is just a little bit about my department. I'm as mentioned, Senior Director of Workplace Culture and Inclusion, and my goal there is to really cultivate a workplace and learning environment of diversity, equity, inclusion, with the goal that it's welcoming, inclusive, and each person has a feeling of belonging. And I want to share some information about Rust Rehabilitation at NYU Langone Health. We're located in New York, as well as we have some satellite sites in Nevada and Florida. And it's a vision of Rust to be a global leader in physical medicine and rehab, creating a world of limitless accessibility. We have over 25 locations throughout Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, and I'm trying to get to the Florida site to visit. I'm just waiting for that invitation and I will buy my ticket and visit. So I'm excited about that happening one day. Oops, I think I went. And then we also been ranked top 10 since 1989. We have amazing physical therapists with a whole host of certifications and skills that they bring in support of caring for our patients. And it's, I'm sure it's something that's familiar to you all. And I think, and if I don't say it, get a chance to say it later on, I'll say it now. Physical therapy, as someone, as a social worker, I have such great respect for our physical therapists and the work that is done one-on-one is some of the most exciting work that we can do as individuals. So thank you for all that you all are doing and learning to do. So let's get started with our learning objective. So tonight we are going to learn and understand and recognize microaggressions in order to minimize its impact on interpersonal interactions in the workplace and with patients. I understand we have some students here, so that this will apply to our students. Wherever there are interpersonal interactions, microaggressions can be found. So this will be relevant for our students as well. And we will explore ways that an organization can address microaggressions to foster an inclusive work and learning environment. So many of you might be aware that if you work for an institution, they will have a notice of non-discrimination. And this is a segment of the one that we have at NYU Langone Health, but it's very similar to the ones for different organizations. In New York, we have expansive protections. So we also have protections for sexual orientation, discrimination, gender identity or expression, transgender status. But wherever you are nationwide, some of these are highlighted in red. There are protections there. I point this out because I mentioned that I did do employment discrimination. And after I left the firm, I began working for institutions. And my goal was to help institutions comply with federal, state, and local law and create an environment that's free of discrimination and harassment. So this, whatever notice of non-discrimination applied to that institution became my roadmap. It was the thing that I use each day to help me ensure that that day I focused on trying to create that environment free of bias and discrimination. And these highlighted groups were the way that I could check myself. If someone came to me and they shared some experience, then I would have to ask myself if what I'm hearing from them would anyway be an indication that they're being treated differently because of their identity or because of their membership in any group. Is it because of their religion? Is it because of their age and national origin? And that's what guided me during the time I did that work. But over time, I started having people coming to me and they would share their experiences. And then I would kind of do my checklist, and it wouldn't rise to the level of unlawful discrimination or harassment, but it was problematic. You could see it in their stories, you could hear it in their voices, in the emotion where they were sharing their experiences. And it was real, but it wasn't necessarily unlawful. And I was in this position where I wasn't, it was not within my scope to respond because it was not unlawful harassment. As time is going on, I realized many times what they were sharing with me were microaggressions or other behavior or comments in the workplace that was impacting them significantly, but it was hard for them to articulate. And I wasn't even empowered at that time to respond. And many times there weren't even offices that could respond to those type of experiences. Hence, one of the reasons why I'm thrilled to be in the position that I have now, because I get to do the legal compliance, but also understand some things do not fall under legal compliance, but they're significant and really impact people's experience in the work and learning environment. So let's start with what I like to call the big eight dimensions of social identity in the United States. There are so many other identities, but these are the big eight, and we all fit into these eight categories. The question is, where do we fit into these eight dimensions? So a social identity is a person's sense of who they are based on their membership in a particular group. It can really impact how we're able to navigate through life, how we see the world, how we're perceived by the world, and our interpersonal relationships are really impacted by our social identity. The key is, where do you fall within any one of these categories? And I'll start by introducing the concept of a dominant identity. Um, and the way that I like to describe what a dominant identity is, if you're not constantly reminded of your identity, then it's a good chance you have a dominant identity. And I found that to be a helpful way for me to explain it to others. So for example, I live and work in New York City, so I take the subway, the train. And if I'm traveling someplace, it's easy for me to get the directions, jump on the subway, and go there. What I don't have to do is find out whether that particular subway station has an elevator or some kind of accessibility to help me because I am able-bodied. So I don't think about those things. I can just jump on the train and go. But someone who may have who's differently abled, who may have mobility challenges, has to look into all of those issues and those parameters before they can take the train. And I think that's one way to think of whether someone holds a dominant identity in any one of these groups. That's a good way to start by, do you ever have to think about it? So, first exercise for you to get involved is I want you to think about a time when someone said something about some aspect of your identity that made you feel insulted or slighted, even if they didn't intend to do it. And you can put your answers in the chat, or you can come off mute if we have a few brave people who want to share their experience, some aspect of your identity.
Sure. I have a small one that just I thought of because it came up today.
Perfect
um,
timing.
a simple example where I am faculty at a DPT education program out in California, and we're doing some level of like virtual interviews for students who are wanting to be part of our program. But one of the generic questions, they actually had to video record themselves, but the question was about your ideal learning environment, and the student kept referring to professors. He says, well, I'd like the professor if he's able to explain this, or if he does that and this. And immediately my mind went, oh, you're just assuming that your professor is a man, which actually kind of surprised me even at this day and age. Our profession is pretty split, actually. So just a small, simple thing like that, where he's not picturing me when he's picturing who his professors may be in this field. So that just kind of stood out, and always it rang a bell to me when maybe if it was a man listening to it, they would think, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But small,
Great
but there.
example. Great example. And that's something that it's possible may happen to you. Maybe not that particular example. It can happen frequently over time. And just people making assumptions about who you are because of the title you hold. Wonderful example. We have some in the chat referring to me as a Jewish American princess. Yeah, that's definitely problematic. Carrying angle in women is greater. Perhaps they carry more shopping bags. May someone want to explain that
Yeah,
for me?
it's just a comment that was made by a professor at one point that when you have your arms at your side, there's just like a certain angle that's created. And I guess it's been found that women have a greater angle. And she very nonchalantly was like, oh, it's because women shop more and they need to carry their
Oh,
shopping bags. And everybody was pretty offended, like, wait a minute. So I thought that was kind of a microaggression while being in school.
yeah, I think you picked that one correctly. That is, yeah, there's a lot of stereotypes. We're going to talk about some other concepts, but there were a lot of stereotypes in that came to play. And you may find that for those of you hopefully who did the activity on your own, even if you didn't share it the chat or come off mute, that the aspect that caused you to feel insulted or slight probably involves some type of stereotype or assumption about a group that you're a member of. Fantastic. Oh, being told my hair looks more professional when it's straightened. My hair is naturally curly. That is a good one. Yes. Someone said same. That's resonating. Absolutely. You're preaching to the choir here. I've had the hair conversation. My CA long ago mentioned that I was young, female, and African American, and how I had to overcome. I don't think he was meaning to help me either. How I had that to overcome. Yeah, yeah, that's definitely like going right at your identity and kind of stating it or asking to touch your hair. Yeah, eye roll cue. Got it. Definitely. Yeah, great ones. Wonderful. I love that. Thank you for sharing. Um, keep if you didn't get a chance to share, keep in mind I'll be back for some involvement, interaction with everyone. So this is another activity that I like to do. Time doesn't allow us to go into it in detail, but I just want to share it with you because it's something you can do on your own and maybe even have small group discussions in your different areas. It's circles of multicultural self. And what it really is it's an activity where you put your name in the middle and you kind of identify some important aspects of your identity. And this is the one that I did for myself. And the identities are not limited to the big eight because we hold so many identities: parent, caregiver, so many. So some things I put about myself: introvert, because I never really understood how I ended up being a litigator as an introvert. So I'm an introvert. I'm black. I'm a dark skinned black woman, so that shouldn't surprise anyone that's jumping at you. I'm an attorney and I'm a cisgender woman. These are some of the identities that I hold. Now, going back to our discussion about the dominant identity and how that impacts how we navigate the world. Another example that I like to give is when I was practicing law and I would go to the courthouse, there was a separate line that the attorneys were able to use. And, all the marshals would say hi, they would kind of, they would screen you, but, but you move so by really quickly. There was always a long line of people who were trying to enter the courtroom who were like giving you like side eyes because you're just walking right in. And you felt, if you wanted to, you could feel pretty important because I'm on the attorney line, that kind of identity, the privilege that I'm not thinking about scheduling extra time to get inside the building because I have another way to get in. Recess, there's a break. I have to leave the building. I go across the street to CVS. When I'm in CVS, I'm not an attorney. I'm a Black woman who's in a store, and the way I act and the way I operate completely changes. I don't go into my purse or my bag when I'm in the aisle. I make sure if I'm going to check the time, I'm doing it in the front of the aisle when anyone can see that I'm not doing anything, I'm not taking anything, because at that point, I'm navigating the world differently. There's no privilege as, getting a special line to enter. I'm a Black woman in a store, and there are certain things I have to understand, certain perceptions that I have to navigate the world through. And I think it's important as we go through these exercises, and I encourage you all to do it. It helps you think about how you navigate the world, but it also makes you stop and maybe think about how those around you may be navigating the world, how your patients may navigate the world, so that when you interact with them, you can keep that in mind. Because if you have a sense of what that person, how they're approaching the health system, how they're approaching this appointment with you, you can be more attentive to not allowing any negative stereotypes or other factors to come into play to really impact that interpersonal relationship. So it's a great activity that I encourage you all to do. But let's get down to the meat and the potatoes. What is a microaggression? So it is a brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, and environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, important point, that communicates hostile, derogatory, or negative slights and insults to the target person or group. These verbal assaults add up and ultimately contribute to an environment that alienates and perpetuates negative attitudes toward marginalized people. Now, this is not a brand new term. This was coined in 1970 by Dr. Chester Pierce, a Harvard psychiatrist. And recently, there's been a lot of work done by Dr. Darold Sue, who's a professor of counseling psychology at Columbia University. And he talks a lot about microaggressions in everyday life. And when we talk about microaggressions, and you'll notice them in the examples that people gave, there are a lot of stereotypes that are at play. And I can't help but point out, for those of you who are familiar with unconscious or implicit bias, that that's such an important concept. And if you haven't done any work in training or reading about that, that's something I would encourage you to do, because there's such a close connection between unconscious implicit bias with microaggressions that it's really hard to address microaggressions without understanding the process that often contributes to people acting and saying things that are insulting and hostile and not realizing that they're doing it. And I think one of the things that makes it sometimes more challenging when you're trying to address a microaggression is because you may truly believe the person who has done it to you did it without any intent, without any malice. And it's easier to get upset and to say something to someone when they purposefully do something to you. But when it's unintentional, sometimes what people will do is, I call it the grin and bear it. And you take on that negativity. You leave that person clueless as to what they've done to go on and do it again, but you've taken that on. And because microaggressions are commonplace, that's something that you're taking on repeatedly. That it's often referred to as a death by 1,000 cuts, because a single one may not be too impactful, but it's the combination, the repetitiveness of it that can be very difficult. And I liken that many times to misgendering. If someone, may be misgendered once, that might be something that, it's manageable, you can grin and bear it. But when you go through the day and it's a constant experience, then by the end of the day, you're exhausted, you're tired, and you can literally feel it. I think your mental health will be impacted and physical health can be impacted. So let us look at some examples to try to help bring home a little more what a microaggression looks like. Okay, so this is probably the most famous one, most common one. Where are you from, or where are you born? And that is very, very common for people who are, I guess in many ways, do not look like the dominant identity. Let's put it that way. Another one is you speak English so well, or you're so articulate. What are you? You're so unique looking. And then another one, which many people can be guilty of, failing to learn or continuing to mispronounce someone's name. It can be an employee, it can be a student, after they've corrected multiple times. And there's a message that's being communicated when that happens over time. You are not a real American. You are forever a foreigner in your own country. Your ethnicity or racial identity makes you exotic. Now, sometimes when I have done this presentation, I'll have people who will ask the question about, I'm just curious, I like to know about where people are from. And I'll say, that's wonderful, that's great, I appreciate that. And I'm not saying you can't have those conversations, but you also need to be mindful of the response you get. Because the problem is usually not when you ask somebody to tell you where they're from, accept their answer. That's the key. They will tell you what they want to tell you. I mean, I used to have this is a joke I used to say where someone would ask someone where they're from, and then they would say a place, and then I would say, they wouldn't believe it. Where you're really from? Have you ever heard that one? And then I would say, yeah, I have my birth certificate if you want to see it. It truly is where I'm from. So it's also, balancing it. You can have a conversation. Sometimes people want to share about their background, where they're from, where their family's from. But if they're not doing that, pushing or insisting that they're not from here would be your agenda, not theirs. So you want to be mindful of that. Another way that a microaggression can manifest when we have providers, and I see this with so many different groups, medical provider of color who's regularly mistaken for housekeeping service worker or any other position but the medical provider, and how upsetting and devastating that is, particularly when their peers do not have that experience. I've also seen, and this is more of active bias, where maybe sometimes patients or clients do ask not to be with a particular provider of color. When you're a provider of color you've gone through all the same work, exams, schooling, and then you get to the place that you've worked so hard to, and you're still continuing to be treated differently. That can be very devastating for our medical providers of color, but other identities, because there are other identities that can, providers who wear religious garb, or who may be part of the LGBTQ plus community may also experience some microaggressions in the workplace. Saying you people, I always say, if you say you people, just stop, because you're already wrong. Just stop the sentence. Don't go any further. That's not a good way to proceed. And what can also often happen in a meeting, the boss tends to call more often on male colleagues than female ones, or listen to male suggestions more, or delegate note-taking to female colleagues. These are some of the things that can happen to take on different forms. And the message is, people of color could not possibly hold high status positions. Women occupy nurturing positions. You do not belong. And that one always jumps out to me, because anytime that message is communicated, something needs to change. You are a lesser being. Let's look at a few more. To a person of color, you're a credit to your race. And this is an example of someone who really believes they're giving a compliment by othering you from other people in your identity. Wow, impressive. How did you become so good at math? The surprise that you have some expertise or degree. To an Asian person, you must be great at math. Can you please help me with this problem? I have Asian colleagues who shared that That's something that they experience frequently, and many of them will tell me, I'm not good at math. Thank you for reminding me. To a woman, I would never have guessed that you were a computer program because of the stereotypes of the roles that women can hold. And the message here is people of color are usually not as smart. All Asians are intelligent and great at math and science. It's unusual for a woman to have strong mathematical abilities. Again, if you see embedded in this, a lot of stereotypes. And just a quick understanding about unconscious bias. This is my quick overview if you're not familiar with it. Unconscious bias is the process that our mind works to kind of create shortcuts in processing information because of how much information we receive throughout the day. We see information in media, the news, all these different ways. And what we don't realize is that unconsciously, some of those stereotypes have stuck. So even if we believe and we are consciously very, do not hold biases, there may be some stereotypes that we are not aware that we hold that can play out in our actions and our behavior and the way we interact with others. If you ask someone whether they are biased against older employees, they probably would say no. But when an assignment comes up, on the group to do something maybe with technology, do you automatically discount the older member on your team? And you may not realize you've done it. You may assume that they are not interested or have the ability to do it. So they're at play all the time, even when we're not aware. And that's where a lot of times the microaggressions come into play because we've done things. We are all subject to engaging in microaggressions. This is not something that only certain people do. Because we have different identities where we can be dominant, we can hold stereotypes about other individuals, and that can definitely lead to impacting the way we interact with others. All right. So what's the big deal? They're micro, right? They're paper cuts. That's the big deal. Grin and bear, let's move on. But the reality is it's not that simple. Microaggressions build up over time and they really can harm people's mental health in ways more than just hurt feelings. Studies show that microaggressions related to sexual orientation and gender identity can contribute to feelings of dehumanization within the LGBTQ plus community, increasing instances of extreme depression or distress. So that is a big deal. And we need to be mindful of this in our workplaces, in our learning environments, in the clinic room, because we don't want to be the one who is creating these situations for others. And obviously we don't want to be subject to microaggressions. It impacts feelings of belonging, which I think is like one of our basic human needs, is to feel like we belong. So if you're dealing with staff, it's hard to feel satisfied and excited in your position if you don't feel like you belong. You feel like you're being othered. You feel as though people see your identity, they don't see you in your role. And it's a tricky situation because many times, it's true story. I went on a job interview when I was working for firms, an interview at a firm. And near the end of the conversation, they started saying, we have a really difficult time recruiting and retaining Black attorneys. And my first thought was, I think I have an idea why, because that wasn't the way to go. But the idea, what I just got the message was, you're looking at my resume, you're speaking with me, and you're seeing a Black attorney instead of an attorney. And there's a time and a place for everything, but when you're there in your professional role, there are many times you want to be there in your professional role. And I think that when sometimes people are focused on other aspects of your identity, it somehow kind of can take away your feelings of belonging because it can really separate you from your peers. And it can also impact patient satisfaction. A patient who's the subject of a microaggression from their provider, it's not going to feel so great. They can get amazing care and treatment, but if there's microaggressions and other stereotypes at play, then it really may impact their satisfaction. And then they don't come to the next appointment. And what do we say they are? What's that famous word? Non-compliance, right? I remember when I was doing social work, it's like someone didn't show up and I was writing my notes, they were non-compliant. But you know what? If technically that would be correct, but there's a reason, because the care was impacted negatively by the interaction, sometimes with providers. So it has such a significant impact, which is why I'm so glad that I get a chance to talk about it with you and generally. So responding to microaggressions. So we have a general understanding of microaggressions. This is a quick overview, foundational, but hopefully you have a sense of what a microaggression is. I have a short video. It's about 2 minutes long that I want to show. It's a comedian's comedian's version of how to respond to microaggressions, and I'm tickled by it. So I hope you are. And then we're going to talk about responding generally for everyone. Okay.
Hi there.
Hi.
Nice day, huh?
Yeah, finally, right?
Where are you from? Your English is perfect.
San Diego. We speak English there.
Oh, no. Where are you from?
Well, I was born in Orange County, but I never actually lived there.
I mean before that.
Before I was born.
Yeah, like, where are your people from?
Well, my great-grandma was from Seoul.
Korean. I knew it. I was like, she's either Japanese or Korean, but I was leaning more towards Korean.
Amazing.
Yeah. Hamshasina. There's a really good teriyaki barbecue place near my apartment. So I actually really like kimchi.
Cool. What about you? Where are you from?
San Francisco.
But where are you from?
Oh, I'm just American.
Really? You're Native American?
No, just regular American. Oh, well, I guess my grandparents are from England.
Oh, well. Hello, Governor! What's all this then? Top of the morning to you. Let's get a small tea. Double, toil and trouble. Mind the gap! Beware, Jack the Ripper! Bloody hell! Pip pip! Cheerio! I think your people's fish and chips are amazing.
You're weird.
Really? I'm weird? Must be a Korean thing.
Okay, so I like to show that for a little humorous break, because sometimes, microaggressions are, it's a very serious matter, but I thought that this comedian's take on it was humorous, but not an option for many of us for responding to microaggressions. So let's talk about some real options that you can use. Before we do that, I always like to point out that there are some barriers to responding to a microaggression. And that has to do, again, going right back to the same identities that we hold. Depending on our positionality, the power differential that may be at play, our gender, our race, our nationality, our citizenship status, all of these different identities might create a situation where someone doesn't feel safe or empowered to respond to microaggressions. So that is something that we always keep in mind. Any response, you want to do what's safe and what's authentic and what works well for you in your identity. But I also realized that when I ask people, have you ever seen any type of conduct, inappropriate conduct in the workplace or, in a learning environment? And, a lot of times people raise their hand and they would say yes. And then I would say, what did you do? Did you do anything? And a lot of times people would say they didn't do anything for a host of reasons. Usually they didn't know what to do. It happened so quickly, and by the time they could think of something to do, it was over. They were, concerned about doing anything because of the power differential of the people involved. A whole host of reasons, but the one that I hear the most is they didn't know what to do. So what I always like to do is to provide some recommendations, suggestions for people to think about, bystander intervention options, for example, because I think that these are things that you actually need to think about ahead of time. Not when you're in the moment, not when things are happening. I mentioned that I'm an introvert, so I'm not the one who jumps up and starts saying anything. I'm the one who has to think about, if this situation arises, this is what I can do in my, with my introvert self. So a lot of these suggestions would be things for you to consider. You'll always want to apply in a safe way, which feels authentic to you based on your identity, and also based on your safety level of power, psychological safety. So we're going to look at a few different ways to respond. And one we'll start with is how to respond to microaggressions. And this is for the individual who's the subject of the microaggression. And you know what's unfortunate? I say this to people who are the subject of discrimination or harassment, is you didn't ask to be in this position. And it's so unfortunate, and it's so disruptive. But there's sometimes things you can do if it feels right and comfortable to you. So, and that may depend on the setting and people who are involved. Sometimes you feel like you can address it in the moment, and that's might be the right thing for you. Sometimes you feel like you need to address it after by pulling someone aside and sharing your experience. I don't believe there's a right and wrong. I think you have to go with what makes sense to you based on your identity. So you want to use I statements. So let's say, for example, you have a situation, and this is probably one of the most common situations I've seen generally throughout my career, is people's use of jokes that are inappropriate, but because it's a joke and because they say ha ha after, or just kidding, that somehow can erases the offensive nature of it. And that happens, and sometimes when it happens, it kind of builds and it turns into a whole moment of people commenting. So let's use that as an example here. So let's say that an individual is there, it's happening, and it's offensive, and it may involve their identity. And I have to always say, and I always say this piece, many times people will look around before they say something, or they'll like try to see who could hear it. And I always say that if you're looking around to see who could hear it, don't say what you're about to say, which means that you feel like there's somebody who shouldn't hear it. And that's a good reason not to say it. And also, you don't know everyone's identity. You don't know the identities of people who may be important to someone, even if they don't hold that identity. So microaggressions take many forms. You want to use I statements. You want to say how you feel in the moment. And something that I always like to recommend is saying that you're uncomfortable. And what's really nice about saying is uncomfortable, when you say that, people stop and they listen, and they start and they think back, what was just said, what just happened. It's a really nice way to create like a road bump in a conversation. It slows things down when you say you're uncomfortable. It also can signal people around. If I say I'm uncomfortable, and Sarah is also there, and she sees that I said that, and she thought I might be, it might give her maybe the feeling that she can say, I was uncomfortable too when you said that. So it's also a way to maybe get some support from those around. Then you can ask questions. What made you assume that? Why do you think that? And one of my favorites is, can you help me understand what you meant by that comment, or what you meant by that statement? And what you hope happens is the person stops and reflects, and we'll look at that in a moment. But these are things that you can do, keeping in mind the positionality, power differential, if you feel comfortable. In times when you don't feel comfortable, that's when you need your bystanders, those around, to be an ally. And because one of the reasons why I think it's important is for microaggressions, because they're thought of as micro, that if someone shares that, a statement or some type of behavior was offensive, sometimes they're thought to be oversensitive. So that's always a fear that many people have, is that maybe I'm just being oversensitive. Let me, grin and bear it and deal with it. But an ally doesn't have to worry about that feeling of oversensitive. They can see something that's not appropriate and they can respond, because many times if they don't hold that identity, they're not as concerned about being considered oversensitive. But as an ally, and for everything, you want to make sure you speak for yourself. You don't want to talk on behalf of someone. You don't want to say what that person experienced, or basically try to take over that person's experience and speak for them. You want to say how maybe what you observed, how you felt about what you observed, and how that might be offensive, how it was offensive to you and maybe offensive to others people, particularly people who are a part of that identity. But you want to make sure that you are talking for yourself, because you don't want to then create another microaggression for the person who's the subject of the original one. Another model that I like to use, it's a step up bystander intervention model that I used quite a bit when I was doing undergraduate work as a Title IX coordinator. The 4Ds in the moment, and this is how I would teach people to how to respond more quickly. There's some times where you want to step in, you want to use a direct response. You want to step in and address the situation directly. So if you have a conversation that, maybe people are talking, making jokes that are inappropriate about a group, you can step in if you feel comfortable saying, I don't think this line of conversation is appropriate. It's offensive. In fact, I think we need to stop talking about this and let's move on to what we were doing. And that's a direct intervention. That's someone who feels empowered, who feels they have the positionality, who feels they have the identity to do that. And that's great. Not everyone will. So I also like to share the distract option. And the distract option is where you try to change the subject quickly. You want to stop people talking about it by bringing up something else. So it may be your patient is ready, or there's a phone call for you, or something along those lines, just to bring that particular situation to an end quickly. It solves the situation in the moment, but it doesn't solve the overall situation, which is when I like to point to delegate, where if you don't feel like you're the one who can address it, find the person who can, whether it's a professor, a senior manager, supervisor, faculty member, whoever it may be. Find someone who can help support you, and hopefully there is someone where you are, and then delegate that, share the experience, and hopefully that there will be a follow-up to address it, so there won't be a repeat. I like to distract because sometimes if there's a power differential, it's maybe your greatest tool in the moment to stop it, and then follow up with a delegate, get someone else to follow up, and then delay. It may happen so quickly. It may be one statement that there wasn't even really a time to respond, because by the time you even heard what was said, this actually happened to me recently. By the time I heard or understood what was said, the call had ended, or was like people were signing off, and it just made me feel really badly, because I was like, I trained on this and I didn't pick up on it right away. So sometimes it's a delayed response. So I had to go back to someone after. Actually, I went to the person who was the subject of it, and I kind of checked in with them to see how they were doing. I said, I think I heard something at the end of that call. And they said that they had, and it didn't feel good for them either. So I was kind of interpreting that, and then talked about it. And we talked about, how she maybe wanted to handle it, and she, had a plan. And I said, great, if you need anything, I'm here to support. But I also allowed her, the agency, to empower her to address it. But it happened so quickly, and many times these things can happen quickly. But it's important to follow up, because you want to prevent it from happening again. Make it common occurrences only stop when people are made aware. Dr. Sue talks about making the invisible visible. And that's part of what we're doing here. Microaggressions are invisible. They're just micro, but they're real. So what we want to do is we want to make the invisible visible, so people are aware. Now, this is the one where we talk about how to respond when you are the person who've committed a microaggression. And as I mentioned earlier, we are all subject to be that person. There isn't any person who's free from making that error, because we have this unconscious process that's happening and impacts our behavior. So I encourage people, you apologize. Just take responsibility for your comments. You want to apologize, because if you've done something that impacts someone negatively, you should want to apologize. There are many times when I would get reports of discrimination, harassment, and I would go to the individual and I would say, I understand that this happened and it made someone feel, X way. This was the impact on someone. And they would always say they're so sorry. They would never intend to do that. That's not who they are. And I have to tell you, 98% of the time, I believed them. There's a small group of people who do these things purposefully, and we handle those things in other ways. But the majority of people, it's not their intent. There's nothing about that they're proud of. They are just they're just so upset. They are just so upset that they could make anyone feel that way. So apologize. That's what I say. So apologize. If that's how you feel, apologize. Try not to be defensive. I think that's a natural reaction, because I think that's a natural reaction. My first thought is, you must have it wrong. But no, maybe they have it right, but you just don't want to hear it. So you want to be reflective about that. You want to listen. You want to think about what you've done, how that could be received, and understand that intent does not equal impact sometimes. And I've seen some comments in the chat. Important to know the difference between an authentic apology and one that is, I'm sorry you feel that way. Isn't that that's one of my favorite ones. I'm sorry you feel that way is a great way of saying nothing, right? So great point. Intention does not equal impact. Absolutely. When we're talking about microaggressions, unconscious bias, we're talking a lot of times about impact that is so different from intent. But it becomes worse if someone is not willing to hear that. If you're not willing to hear that and to address your behavior, to learn more. My greatest hope for anyone who is listening and taking, this presentation right now is that you leave here wanting to learn more. I can't say everything here. It's a quick overview, foundational conversation we're having right now. But if you leave here wanting to learn more and actually take steps to learn more, then you can try to make your intent and your impact closely mirror each other. And that should be each person's goal as we interact with others. Great. Now, patient care and microaggressions. So we touched on this a little bit. Patients, when they come to our, medical appointments, or they come to the healthcare systems, they come going through navigating their life, experiencing microaggressions. When they come to our medical appointments and to our healthcare appointments, they are also anticipating that they may experience a microaggression. So one of the reasons why it's so important for us to understand microaggressions and address them in ourselves and around us is so that we do not bring microaggressions in the treatment room impacting our patients. That's one direction. The other direction is patients will bring microaggressions into the clinic room and then cause our medical providers to be the subject of it. So it's two-way directional. And one of the things that's so important about presentations like this is that what we're doing is we are giving each of us a shared vocabulary. When people used to come to my office and they would share the challenges they were having, and I would ask all the right questions for unlawful discrimination and harassment, but not necessarily pick up on what they were saying as well as I hope I would today, it's because they didn't have the language to communicate it to me. I didn't have the right language to receive it. Once we have this language, we need to use it so that we can identify these microaggressions. They should not happen towards our patients, and they should not happen towards our staff. It's important that we are cognizant of it and we make a plan as to what do we do when this happens in the clinic when we're working with our patients. And it's a thoughtful plan, and it's in no way necessarily an easy one. I'm not going to tell you that it's an easy plan, but if you're not talking about it, if you're not planning for it, you're leaving the provider on their own, you're leaving the patient on their own, and things don't get better. The fact that it's commonplace will just continue to be the case. And it can impact care, as I mentioned, non-compliance, people feeling comfortable to seek treatment. All of these things are impacted, and we want to ensure health equity, right? Access to care for everyone. So if microaggressions that are at play, let's do what we can to address them and remove them. And how to respond to microaggressions for organizations, and that probably includes schools as well. You want to sponsor educational trainings. You want to learn about unconscious implicit bias. That's very important. You want to learn about microaggressions. You want to be familiar with cultural competency, cultural humility, because those three concepts play together so well to really impact interpersonal relationships. So you want to provide that increased insight into microaggressions and some of those related topics. You want to encourage the use of shared vocabulary. The more we have the same vocabulary, the better we can communicate our experiences and also lead to validations of feelings. Part of the difficulty that microaggressions cause is that sometimes people think maybe I am being too sensitive. Maybe it isn't a big deal. And they're not getting the chance to validate their feelings that, no, it's not okay that you called me that. It's not okay you assumed something about me. It's not okay that you said I'm articulate. There's no reason why you would think that I wouldn't be, other than X, Y, or Z. So it's important for that reason. And also it shows a commitment to diversity, inclusion, and belonging, which is something that is very important. I think should be for everyone, but it definitely is for me. So a few key takeaways, and then I really would love a chance for us to talk with each other. An environment that welcomes diverse staff members also welcomes diverse patients, clients. So when you work on your staff and creating that welcoming, inclusive environment, it really does kind of it spreads to the environment that's created for patients. They can feel when they're walking into a space that is welcoming to all the staff. And when someone has that walking in, it just makes such a big difference in their desire to really engage, I think, in the care and whatever treatment recommendation is being made. Understanding microaggressions is an effective way to promote both patient and staff satisfaction. Understanding and addressing microaggressions means being intentional about recognizing how your behavior and actions can impact your workplace and patient care. We can support others who experience microaggressions, and we can self-reflect and educate ourselves to prevent being the cause of a microaggression. So I will take questions, and I put one of my favorite James Baldwin quotes: "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." Any thoughts, any questions? I take comments too. I think I would love to have a little dialogue together during our time.
Right. Yeah, I'll share again. My name's Cameron. And I just was really interested when because I was giving a presentation to our PT students again on cultural humility and cultural competence. But when the topic of microaggressions came up, one thing that I thought was really interesting when I was researching it was sort of this other idea of micro affirmations and how you can kind of balance things out sometimes. I do see it as an act of allyship, but it's smaller, also still just day-to-day interactions, subtle things where you can validate someone or just say, you know, hey, I recognize this is a different experience for different people, or just those small pieces of open listening. But even, you know, when it's mentioned, maybe that woman is taking notes in the meeting, or they're asked to do something, or someone is spoken over, it's that idea of saying, oh, actually, I really want to hear more of what so-and-so was saying, or actually, I want to make sure that we give credit where it's due. Just those small pieces, again, can go just as far as the microaggressions, but in the micro affirmation realm.
Love that. Absolutely. Dr. Sue talks about micro interventions and the things that we can do to really impact and allyship. It's so key. And that's another great topic if anyone wants to, continue on their journey of learning. Allyship, the ability to support somebody, to be, thank you for that link, to amplify someone else's voice. It's truly an honor, and it's a wonderful thing when you have someone whose voice is not heard. If you're in that, that meeting, and a woman is being asked to take notes, and you're not offered to take notes. I've been dying to take notes. I'll do it. That's an act of allyship. There's so many ways. I love the idea of micro intervention, because then it becomes habit. If we all did that, then we'd have less microaggressions. Wonderful. Any other thoughts, comments, questions?
I guess I have a question. I'm not sure if this would be considered a microaggression, and I would love to know your take on it, or if you could explain this to me. When somebody in the group, rather than calling out an individual for being other, in many of the examples you used, they were really focused on somebody's otherness. Mm-hmm. But what is it when I'm talking to a group and I assume that everybody is part of the majority and I'm not recognizing their otherness? So, maybe I'm looking at a group and I assume everybody here identifies as Caucasian. And I think that goes a lot to what you're saying of, look both ways before you say something. Or I assume nobody in the room has a disability or something. Is that a microaggression towards people who maybe do identify with the minority group, maybe LGBTQ or, any marginalized group?
Yeah, no, I think it definitely can be a slight or indignity because you're erasing someone's identity and grouping them with a group that may not be their own. So I definitely think it could be microaggression. It can be also probably pretty offensive to have that happen. I think the way to try to avoid that is to always think, put on the lens of inclusion. Who's in the room? Who's here? And as I speak, am I addressing their needs? Have I missed anyone in the way I'm speaking or categorizing? So the lens of inclusion is a really great way to try to avoid those types of indignities. Definitely. And for example, I often, I don't think I did today, but I usually start by saying my name and sharing my pronouns. And I do that even as a cisgender woman who's woman appearing, you know, and I've had someone say, why do you do that? You don't need to do that. But I don't do it for myself. I do it for the person who may want to do it, may, because of their identity, really want the opportunity to share, or at least see a signal that somebody understands that someone may have pronouns that are different than what may be assumed. So that's part of the inclusion. It's part of saying, I see you. And it's a micro intervention kind of way of allyship, you know? So absolutely, that's one way to be inclusive. Yes, I see a hand.
Yeah, is it okay if I say something?
Please, yes.
Yeah, so one of the ways I've kind of learned to avoid the pitfall of assuming that everybody, because the audience maybe looks the same, is by understanding the difference between cultural competence and cultural humility. Because there's actually there's like an ocean between the two. Because cultural competence assumes that because you're competent of somebody's culture, that you know everything about everyone from that culture, where if you look at the literature on cultural humility, it's actually vastly different. Like I knew what those two words meant, cultural and humility, but I didn't know what the term cultural humility meant until I just kind of started looking into it. And it's actually like a philosophy and approach. And I feel like, Molree, to your point, it kind of encompasses a lot of the things you've been talking about on how to address microaggression, like in the self-reflection, holding the institute responsible for also, you know, addressing the systemic failures that address people experiencing disparities. And so that there's really helpful literature. There's some great videos available if you just Google cultural humility that kind of helps dig, at least I found, was really helpful to dig into how to address that for myself.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And I agree. It's very important. The way I sometimes summarize it is cultural competence is getting to know different cultures generally, obviously, because it's not monolithic. So I don't know my culture 100%. So I'm never going to learn someone else's 100%. And cultural humility is acknowledging that and kind of going on that journey of being a lifelong learner. So you are always you're trying to become culturally competent with the understanding it's not necessarily a destination, it's a way of living. So yeah, I love being a lifelong learner is the key. And as I am, I learn so many things all the time. And I think it's actually really enjoyable, and it's important for us to never feel that we've arrived. Thank you for that. I would love to hear anyone have any personal takeaways from our meeting today.
I have one question.
Yes.
So thank you so much for this presentation. It was really interesting, and especially knowing about your experience, for instance, going in stores and how you feel you have to act in a certain way is really, so I'm Caucasian. So it's just really important for me to hear, and I think just, you know, to be able to relate to other people. And so I'm a physical therapist assistant, and I feel like in the world of physical therapy, you know, we're pretty like microcosm, and oftentimes it seems like everything is geared, or like everything is assumed that will be geared towards the physical therapist. And physical therapist assistants just get completely ignored in conversations. Or for instance, I had a job interview earlier this week, and a very recent PT grad asked me if I went through any clinicals. And I was kind of shocked by, you know, just the assumption that maybe I wouldn't have. because I treat patients, I go through education, I go through clinicals, and I love what I do. And so just feeling like physical therapists just don't even take into account that we are part of the profession and that we are educated made me feel really small in that moment. And I've been offered the job and I don't know that I'll take it because I got that feeling from multiple physical therapists that I interacted with, that they just purely based on my title and not who I am and how I work, they just weren't quite confident that they could work with me. And I feel like that's just one little thing that happens within our own physical therapy world where, I'd just like to speak out for physical therapist assistants.
Well, thank you for that. I really appreciate that. And unfortunately, it's not necessarily an uncommon experience in different areas where there is like a feeling of like a hierarchy or something along those lines. And one of the things that I've spoken about, one thing, maybe perhaps the only benefit that has come from the COVID pandemic is the fact that there was attention to different roles that people hold, and it was understood that the role of the building services, and how important they were to keeping the rooms clean and keeping our staff safe, keeping patients safe, the roles of our pharmacy tech, all these different people, the roles that no one thought about. They just assumed they took for granted, to be honest, that were so key and important. They were really elevated in the site because it became so clear that in order for us to really combat this situation with COVID, we needed everybody's hands on deck. So what we're talking about is inclusion, and my thing has been, let's maintain really elevating different roles. Let's maintain this lens of inclusion of all the roles that make things work, all the different members of a treatment team, and so that's something you can continue to talk about, to show the value of the work that you do, so that it's understood that the care that patients receive is because of the team. So inclusion is the key. Thank you so much for sharing that.
I kind of wanted to add something that I think is on the reverse end of things sometimes for folks. So, I present as white. I don't identify as such. Both my parents are from third world countries. I grew up speaking a different language. And a lot of times when I am using my second language, the automatic question is like, wow, where did you learn that? That's amazing. Like, how did you learn to speak that language so well? And then kind of to the point that I think it was, is it Marie or Madi was saying about, speaking to a group of people and maybe everyone's presenting as such, I would be that person in that audience that would kind of be not included in that, that hello or that greeting.
Right.
And I'm just kind of acknowledging that, having lived my whole life in this skin, I guess I've learned to kind of use the advantages and the disadvantages, right? Like there's kind of pros and cons to both. Growing up, it was, I'm not dark enough to be part of the group that I'm a part of. So kind of like the reverse. But then realizing kind of the power with that and using that as a way to be an ally, even though I am part of the group.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's very complex, and we should just try not to make assumptions about anyone, because this world is very diverse. People move around. We have all kinds of backgrounds and ways that we identify, and I think it's just better to kind of acknowledge that as opposed to making those assumptions.
Oh, thank you. That's such a great example. It's such a great example of, I always say, you look around and you think you know who's in the room, and you don't necessarily know who's in the room. And I think it's very short-sighted to think that you would have the ability to know who's in the room. Many identities are invisible, and people may not present the way stereotypically you think they should, so you can miss so much. Really great point. Thank you for bringing that home. See in the chat, you overhear things more too when people assume wrong about you. Yeah, that is a great way to get inside information because they don't know. I have friends who speak Spanish and people don't think they do because they're Afro-Dominican or Afro dark skin, and people will talk and they'll take it all in and then they'll respond. So they take advantage of that. So I think that's great. Yeah, secret power. I like that. Fantastic. Any other takeaways you want to share? Okay. Well, then, I thank you all for spending this hour with me. I enjoyed the opportunity to be here with you all, and I wish you all the best. Please continue your learning because that's the key. That's the one takeaway I hope everyone takes with them.
Molree, thank you so much. We're so grateful for you. Fantastic presentation.
Thank you.